Hi, I'm Christian Brindle with Christian Brindle Insurance Services.
And I'm Glenn Shelton with Lead Heroes and Hire Heroes.
And this is Taco
Tuesday.
Tuesday. Let's talk about insurance. This is a show all about growing your business as an insurance agent and bringing you up-to-date marketing trends. We have great guests.
We have sales experts. We'll talk about all things pertaining to senior insurance and other lines of insurance. We're trying to help you grow your business, and we are excited that you are here to watch our content.
If you enjoy this episode, make sure to like the episode, subscribe to any platform that you enjoy to listen on, make sure to leave a 5-star review if it allows it, and we'll see you on the episode.
We'll see you in there.
This video is brought to you by none other than Hire Heroes, you guys. Hire Heroes is your one-stop shop when it comes to virtual staffing and making sure that you have qualified talent with your business. One thing that I love about Hire Heroes, you guys, is they've actually gone through the process already of vetting and making sure that your staff member is well trained to best fit your needs. Whether you need help with social media work, posting things on your accounts, responding to people that send messages to your social media accounts, whether you need help with data entry or a multitude of other things that they're qualified to do, Hire Heroes has got you covered. If you're having trouble finding quality talent and number two, affording to be able to run payroll for that talent, Hire Heroes has got you covered with an affordable alternative to have a virtual assistant working for your business. There's a link down in the description of this video to where you can learn more about getting your own VA through Hire Heroes. I certainly recommend it. They're what we use in our business for all of our virtual assistant needs, and you will want to make sure that you check them out today.
Hello. Welcome. It's another episode of Taco Tuesday. Let's talk about insurance. I'll be your guest host today, Glenn Shelton, founder and CEO of Lead Heroes. Today on the podcast, I have a special friend, Christian Brindle. Some of you might know who he is. Microphone's all blurred out. Today, we have a very interesting topic, and Christian and I were like mid-debate before we turned on the recording, and I said, Christian, let's just get this on the record. Let's talk about this. This is very relevant, very important. And it's the compliance conversation, you guys. It comes back to this over and over and over.
My favorite.
The people who are too worried about compliance to ever even sell a policy seems to really fuel this conversation, in my opinion. It's pretty straightforward. A lot of this stuff, people, I think, make it way more complex than it needs to be. That's kind of my personal stance on this. But I want to jump right into where Christian and I were at right before we turned on the camera and started recording. So Christian and I were talking about the 48-hour rule. And we learned from CMS that part of the 48-hour rule going into this year's AEP is that inbound phone calls will not be required to wait 48 hours to present and to collect an application for a Medicare Advantage plan. Whereas all of you agents doing business face-to-face, unless it's a quote-unquote walk-in, so unless you have a brick and mortar, someone walks in off the street, unless it's not that, you have to wait 48 hours. You have to get a scope signed and then wait. So that being said, I saw this morning from a friend of ours in the industry who posted in one of the Facebook groups with screenshots. So this wasn't just like this is why I'm bringing it up. I saw the receipts, and that's this person, Tony Merwin. I'm just gonna go ahead and name you and give you a little shout out.
Where was Mr. Merwin's post? Because I feel so in the dark about this. Like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know.
That's part of what I love about this, though, is because you're just getting blindsided right now. So here was my interpretation.
Actually, I won't find it. I won't find it. I'll just be surprised.
I don't want you to find it. My interpretation of the post with the receipts included is that CMS came out with a memo, and the memo was kind of pointing more towards inbound calls do have to wait 48 hours. So CMS, in kind of classic CMS methodology, they muddied their own waters like immediately, right? Like, and part of the problem too is like you get some sort of explanation from like an NMO or a major carrier, and you take that as like gospel, like, oh, Cigna just sent this out. Cigna wouldn't tell me what's wrong on compliance. So all of a sudden you have kind of this competing information on the definition of what some of this compliance looks like, specifically the 48-hour rule. So, and this kind of happens to some degree every year, but right now it's about the 48-hour rule, and Cigna put out something that said, all inbound calls are fine. You don't need to worry about the 48-hour rule. CMS puts out a memo that says, hey, just kidding. Like, even if it's an inbound call, it needs to wait 48 hours. There's going to be conflicting information. What do you do? What do you do as an agent when you see conflicting information? Do you just go with what CMS says? The carriers who you don't have a relationship directly with CMS, right? Like Christian Brindle doesn't have a contract with CMS. You're writing contracts with the carrier, right? So, your business partner, which is the insurance carrier, is telling you, here's what the rules are. But what if CMS is saying something different? What do you do? Who are you going to go by?
Yeah. So I did what I wasn't supposed to do, and I found the post. You found because I'm like, he's being quiet. How can I comment on this if I don't see everything? Right. So okay. So looking at the screenshot from CMS was July 18th. What I was under the impression on, and I don't really know, but CMS had come out with the final rule, right? When everyone was going nuts about it, it was everything everyone was talking about. And then they came out with almost like an addition to it that had to do with the inbound calls. That's what I remember. There was like an additional statement that was made that was like, oh, by the way, this is also, not required. So I feel like, okay, so the other thing I want to mention about this, last week, we did a training for our university members and our agents with Kim Patterson, our mutual friend, Miss Kim Patterson. And Kim came on and talked about this very thing. And what she said was that more or less what we were told was that they were getting from more sources than not that it was going to be not required for inbound calls. So they were basically just rolling with that, right? And this is essentially agent pipeline, integrity. And so that's kind of where my stance was. A couple days later, I did a talk for Utah NABIP, and I was talking about the 48-hour scope of appointment rule. And I stood in front of, the audience there and talked about it. And
was some misinformation coming out of your mouth? Oh my goodness.
What I said is everything we had heard from integrity was that it was not going to be required for inbound calls. So that's basically the stance I'm going with. I trust the sources, I guess, of agent pipeline. I trust the sources of integrity. And at the end of the day, the carriers are the ones that regulate us, not CMS. That's the thing to think about, right?
Okay. Hang on. Stop you right there. So to get back to my question.
Okay.
It's October it's midnight before October 1st. It's like the AEP Eve. Okay. And you have to start operating compliantly tomorrow morning when you come into the office with AEP 2024 rules. Okay. You're going off of what the carrier has expressly explained to you to be compliant over CMS if there's competing differences there, or if there's some misinterpretation between what the rules are between the two of them. Is that?
I don't like the question. I don't even want to answer it necessarily. I don't even want to answer it because someone's going to clip this and they're going to put it somewhere, be like, look what Christian Brindle said. Take me out of context. Like I'm Andrew Tate now. I'm insurance Andrew Tate. Where I said something that might sound horrible on the surface, but listen to the full context.
If it's any, I agree with you. If you're gonna say that, you're gonna go off of what the carrier said, because again, like I just said before, I'm like your agreements with the carrier. Like if the carrier is telling you to do something and it's direct communication from their compliance team and they are integrating, entirely with CMS, right? I mean, that's what the carriers are doing. The carriers are working with CMS very closely. They want you to abide by the rules. And if a carrier were to give you false information, and then you're processing applications with the carrier and you were to get in trouble with CMS and you're like, this is what your compliance department told me to do.
Right.
It's like Cigna, Aetna, Humana, like if their compliance team put out information that later became, incorrect or was deemed incorrect, or you were operating uncompliantly, I would turn right back to the carrier and be like, this is your official communication. This is what you told me to do. So if I'm in trouble, you're in trouble.
Here's another piece of the pie to kind of dissect here. So I'm looking at these screenshots on Tony's post. The CMS one was from July 18th. A lot can change from July 18th to what we're in now, the end of August. Like legitimately.
That's 32 days, 33 days from right now.
Essentially like 5 years in compliance lingo, right? Like a lot can change. So over that period of time, it's going to be essentially, in my opinion, that the carriers are behind the scenes having conversations with CMS and getting clarification on this. I don't think the carriers are saying anything without CMS being like, thumbs up, in my opinion, right? Like, I just don't see that happening necessarily. And so if like the most up-to-date thing from CMS that is saying that, and then there's a more recent thing from a carrier, from a national FMO, from Integrity, I'm going to trust the more up-to-date thing, I guess, is also the piece of the pie that I'm thinking about. Like, how old is the communication? Because the final rule, if you look at the document of the final rule document, if you just go by that alone, 700-page document, if you just go by that in and of itself, you would get the impression that inbound calls would be subject to the rule, like just by that document.
Right.
And so, but that document came out when, right? Like Q1 and beginning of Q2.
Let's go back to last year's AEP and the compliance information that was being passed from CMS from the carriers regarding call recording. Some carriers had stricter rules than what CMS was telling people to do. Other carriers were having looser rules than CMS. And so like, because of what we've seen historically, I'm anticipating more of the same. I'm anticipating that there's not a unanimous agreement on what a compliance rule is that CMS has created, that it's going to be left open to some type of interpretation. Maybe it's a small window, maybe it's a big window, but we saw it with call compliance last year. We saw the call recording. Some people said you only have to record sales calls. Other carriers said you have to record every single phone call. Customer service, calling, Mrs. Jones up and saying happy birthday to her. You have to record all of it. And we saw some that landed kind of in between that, where it was like, well, just sales and marketing calls, but not customer service. So it's like I've seen it across the board, kind of different carriers, people saying things differently. So how can there be clarity? Like how? I don't know. And there's compliance officers that I've heard that have gotten it wrong too.
Sure.
I don't know any one source that's been like the trusted go-to source on the most up-to-date compliance, because it does change so often, like you're saying.
Right. Like and that's perfectly fair. That's perfectly fair. I feel like it's definitely one of those things where it's going to vary based on who you talk to. It's going to vary based on the carrier that you're working with. And it's all based on interpretation. Why? Because the document that CMS put out for the final rule is a 600 to 700 page document. They need lawyers and all kinds of people to kind of dig through this thing and interpret it. It's almost like someone trying to go through the freaking Bible and be like, what did Paul mean here in this chapter? What does this analogy mean? Like, there's like philosophers and scholars like trying to interpret it. It's the same basic principle. That's why there's all these different churches that teach all these different things. They're all teaching from the same book, but they're like, this passage meant this. It's like, no, this passage meant this. It's like the different denominations of CMS. And but I feel like
you just compared the splintering of Christianity to CMS compliance, and I'm here for it. I loved it. It's a very great analogy, and that's really what's happening.
Right. Like that's really what comes to my mind when I think about it. And at the end of the day, right, like all denominations of Christians usually believe like 90% the same things. And I'd say 90% of compliance officers and experts in the compliance world will probably agree about 90% of the same things. And there'll be like a little bit of things that differ here or there.
Window.
So that's another way I think about it, right? Like, I think there's a few gray areas. And for me personally, I live in the gray.
You're wearing gray. We're both wearing gray.
We're both wearing gray. Like I wear gray. I live in the gray. I'm not going to over-regulate myself. Right. Like you mentioned earlier, people that take this stuff so seriously that they'll never write a policy. Usually the people that take it the most seriously are people that write like 1 or 2 policies ever. And they just preach to agents about how, they're going to get struck by lightning. Though that is, in my opinion, disgusting. But I think that what I'm telling our agents is this: do your best, do the best you can. And I think
here comes another snippet.
I do.
Christian Christian's against compliance. He just says, do your best.
Do your best. I do think, in addition to that, I've talked to so many different folks in the carrier world that are high up in the carrier world and things like that. And a lot of what I've heard from a lot of them is really what they're looking for when they do a audit on somebody or they have an allegation or something like that. They're looking for more than anything else is intent. Was your intent good or was your intent bad with that particular client? Now, there's certain things that are blatant, right? Like if you're cold calling for Medicare Advantage, let's say, you have no permission to contact, nothing like that. That, of course, your intention could be good, but it's blatant, right? So like, it's not a blanket statement across the board. But let's say you have a compliant lead source, you're, doing everything right. Maybe there's one little tiny thing you did wrong. I'm not telling anyone to do any little tiny thing wrong, but I'm saying if you did, we're human, and there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of regulations. They're mainly just looking for like, was your intention good with that client? Were you trying to help that client based on the sales call, based on, everything else in between? And I think that's what people miss. I think that's what a lot of agents miss when they get so freaked out about these compliance rules is it's not a witch hunt. I was told that last year with the 48-hour, with the call recording rule. It's not a witch hunt.
Right.
I got told that from many people in high places that agents think it's a witch hunt. It's not a witch hunt. And it's going to be based on your intention being good or bad with the client. You should try your best to follow the rules, but when the rules aren't clear across the board and you're going to have 12 different versions of it, how can you really follow it to the T if you don't really know what they are?
Right. Yeah, I think, so go back to the 48-hour rule specifically and how there's been some miscommunication right now. Like, to go back to this very relevant topic coming into AEP, where do you think it's going to fall at the end based on everything you've seen and heard? I mean, because again, I think there's also this like, not all inbound calls will qualify. So I think they might get into like what qualifies as an inbound call. And I think that's based on the sources that I have and the people in compliance that I'm aware of who are in the know. And again, I don't think there's any one person. I've seen people get it wrong and try to say, well, this is what they mean by that. It sounds like they're going to try to have a really strict definition of what an inbound call qualifies as. And historically, they haven't. Historically, an inbound call was like anytime your phone rang, that was an inbound call. It didn't really matter the origin of that call. But it sounds like they're going to get into the weeds of what an inbound call is, which I know some of you are probably listening to this and they're like, yeah, let's go take the call centers down. Whoa, 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 whoa. There's a lot of that in the Facebook groups, and that's totally fine. I get it. You think all the call centers in the world are just destroying like the Medicare industry, but the reality is it's much more complex than that.
Yeah, agreed. Like
But yeah, so what do you think?
Like if someone calls a lead, let's say they get a direct mail lead, they call it, and they tell the person pretty early on, Mrs. Jones, I need you to hang up and call me back. That happens a lot. There's a lot of that, to just basically essentially make it an inbound call.
Yes.
Is that something that should be not defined as an inbound call? I would say, like, those kind of things are probably what they're looking to eradicate. If someone, let's say, finds you on Google, or they were referred to you by a friend and they literally pick up the phone and call you, I can't imagine that wouldn't be
right
approved, right? Or all right. I think they're trying to get rid of like the muddying of the waters from the standpoint of people being like, I got a direct mail lead, I called you,
right,
and then we hung up and you called me, and now it's an inbound call. Like that twisting of it, I guess, is
100%.
probably what I would imagine would go into the definition.
A lot of that's happening though, right? Like a lot of the twists. Yeah, a lot of that's happening. I mean, that's what I'm hearing directly from a lot of people, is stuff like that's happening where it's like, hey, you call me, or, just blatantly disregarding the rule. And that's where it gets tough, is there's people who are trying to do the right thing who might mess up. There's, agents who are just blatantly like, I'm not recording any of my calls. Nope. You can't make me do that. Like,
come get me.
Yeah.
Come get me.
That's insane to me too.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like,
but
I think you should always do your best to operate as compliantly as you possibly can as an agent.
For sure.
At the same time, I do think there's people out there that will preach to you and try to get you to overregulate yourself. Like, and what I mean by that is there's people that are like trainers, influencers that will do that. Like, their whole brand is compliance, and be afraid, and the boogeyman. Like that's horrible. I wouldn't want to be known for that. I wouldn't want to be known for like a fear-mongering compliance Nazi. Like, I don't want that to be my brand. And if you're following people that is essentially what they're cramming down your throat, and that's all they ever teach, and they bring nothing else to the table, you should question who you're following, in my opinion, you guys. But like, it's such a hot button for me, because I think that overall, you should do your best. You should do your best to operate as compliantly as possible, like I said. But if you make a mistake here and there and it's unintentional, are you going to get struck by lightning? Probably not. You're human. Like, you just do your best. That's what I mean by that when I talk to agents. And I've had people attack me for that. Be like, Christian Brindle said not to follow the rules. No, that's not what I said. It's never what I've said. Follow the rules to the best of your ability, but show me someone that's writing 500 policies a year that doesn't make a mistake here or there.
Yeah, I think it's inevitable. Especially, I think that's something to point out, is like, even the absolute best compliant operations that I'm aware of, and there's a lot of people who absolutely are playing by the rules down to the T, that we get to work with at Hire Heroes, Lead Heroes. And even when I'm talking to them, stuff comes up where Mrs. Jones got another agent that got in her ear and said, oh, you got scammed, blah, 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 because they're trying to flip her policy.
Yep.
There's a lot of that happens. I've seen that happen, which is, again, that's kind of like, that's like an ethical issue, in my opinion, with as salespeople. Like, just move on. Like, you don't need to get into this senior's ear and tell her she got ripped off, and that you have a better, and then it's like, it's almost the same exact policy, but you're just like flipping them to a different carrier, and you're telling them that they got ripped off. And now Mrs. Jones is so angry. She's calling Christian up. She's like, Christian, you lied to me. You gave me the worst policy. Humana sucks, blah, blah, blah. Like, that's absurd. And that happens a lot. Unfortunately, that happens a lot. And then sometimes, sometimes seniors just get confused. They forget. They might not remember, and that happens a lot too. I mean, if you're dealing with someone in their late 70s, 80s even, I mean, sometimes stuff like that's going to happen where you did everything right, but then they're still accusing you of doing it wrong just because they're forgetful, they're getting older. Unfortunately, that's just part of the demographic. So you have to do your best, but you're always going to have complaints or issues that potentially come from your clientele. It's just part of it.
I've always said, if you never have an allegation, it means you haven't written a lot of business. It's going to come with the territory, right? Like,
boom.
I
That's a mic drop. If you're talking about compliance and you've never had an allegation, you probably don't write hardly any business.
Right. You don't have much of a book. Like it's just like tell me you don't have a book without telling me you don't have a book. It's probably saying I've never had an allegation. Or I've never seen an allegation or anything. Like we've had 2 allegations ever. The first one was the client was like 85 and complete, like just out of his mind, like 6 months later said we didn't tell him his plan had copays, Medicare Advantage plan. Of course we did. Why would we say that? Like that's number one. It went unfounded because there was no evidence that we had said anything like that. Number 2, client was absolutely out of her mind and crazy. She had a handler. And the insurance company sided with us and said she was crazy. Like that's basically what they said. They felt like they said that in different words, in more politically correct words. They said that like the client was not competent to be able to make the claims that she was making, like mentally, like from a legal standpoint, like not there. And so like either one of those situations, did we do anything wrong? No, we did absolutely nothing wrong in either of those situations, but we still went through the allegation. We still had them because we have in one corner, a crazy person, and another person, an older person that's having memory problems. Like it comes with the territory. And so, especially when you're dealing with seniors. And so I just feel like you should want to have as few allegations as possible, but to go forward being like, I never want to get an allegation. I mean, yeah, sure. You should never have a goal to get an allegation, obviously, but it's going to happen. I've always said for every
like speeding
500
tickets
to 1,000 clients. Yeah. I get them all the time.
Yeah. I had an allegation as a final expense agent. I had someone who complained to the carrier that I had written. They said they had never contacted me, like never wanted the policy that they signed up for. And at the time, again, as an agent and it being my first allegation from someone, I was kind of taken aback. I was like, oh my gosh, this person is just like trying to attack me, trying to take me out. And I honestly, all I had to do is I typed up a paragraph that said like, hey, I met with this person at this day, and then I had a copy of the direct mail lead. And I said, here's the direct mail lead. I met them and talked to them this day, and they signed up for the policy, like, very clearly their signature on the application. And that's it. It went away, and so it was such like a non-issue. And I do remember losing sleep for days about it, right? Like I remember freaking out, being like, the carrier's going to report to the DOI. I'm going to get like a ding on my license. Like, oh my gosh, here it goes. And it was absolutely a nothing burger, 100%.
Right. And most of the time that's what those are. Now, if you're doing shady things, then maybe it does go farther than that, right? Like if you're an agent that you're watching this and, Glenn did everything right. Glenn did everything the right way. He had the evidence to back everything up. It wasn't anything heinous that he had done in the appointment. But if you are cutting corners, if you are being like compliance be damned, that kind of thing, that's the other end of the spectrum that you don't want to be, right? There's compliance Nazi 100%. And there's, I don't give a, what there's 2 ends of the spectrum. You want to be right here in the middle.
I do want to be respectful of your time. I feel like we've gotten through the meat of this conversation. I think this is one of those things, like I do like what you said, where it's kind of like, what's the most up to date? I think that is a big part of it, because things will change it seems like every couple of weeks this year. Things have kind of changed. Like every month, I feel like this compliance conversation has evolved in 2023. January, it was way over here. There's a lot of extremes being talked about. And then it came back, and now it's kind of, coming back somewhere in the middle as they're trying to process this. So final thoughts, Christian, on a 48-hour rule for this AEP 2024 and anything else compliance related as of, 3rd week of August. Final thoughts.
Yeah, I would say I've seen things get sent to me of people saying things like, there's going to be another final rule coming before AEP and da, da, da.
I've heard that too.
Wait. Like it's going to be like October 25th and you're still going to be waiting. and the rest of us are going to be writing business. Like, there's not another final rule coming that I'm aware of. Like, it's just clarifications on the rules that's happening right now from CMS, from carriers, from this, from that. I think you just need to, again, do your best to be as compliant as you possibly can. But I don't believe it needs to prevent you from growing your business. And there's a lot of people out there that like you worship at the altar of compliance and you're so over afraid about it. It doesn't have to be that scary of a thing. I think if you know, you have your heart's in the right place, trying to help people, you're trying to do the right thing and just do the best that you can, I don't believe anything's ever going to happen to you, in my opinion. Just do your best. That'd be my final thoughts.
Love it. Guys, my final thoughts on this whole entire conversation, I think, you know, it really is do your best. It's really, you know, something I like to say is if you do what's best for the Medicare beneficiary, even if for whatever reason they deem it uncompliant, you know, you forgot to record that one phone call, you mentioned something in the appointment about life insurance on accident because you weren't thinking, right? Whatever the thing is that you did that ended up being deemed uncompliant, as long as you were genuinely trying to do what's best for that Medicare beneficiary, I really think you have very little to worry about. And that's really what I've always said from the beginning. The rules change and we have to kind of be willing to adapt. And I honestly think something that Christian and I have also both talked about and agreed on is it's an opportunity to make more money. If you can roll with the compliance punches and quickly make yourself compliant when a change happens, you're now getting sifted through a filter of people that are going to just basically opt out. We've seen a lot of it this year, in my opinion. I've seen a lot of health agents go do other things because they're like, oh, Medicare is getting too strict. I don't want to do this anymore. That's happens more often than you can think. So ultimately, I think you should look at it as an opportunity. If you can figure it out and implement it quickly, it's that much more money that you can potentially earn. So that is my final thoughts on today's episode, you guys. If you are watching this on YouTube, be sure to give us a like, hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on any one of these different podcast platforms that Taco Tuesday is available on, give us a 5-star review if you feel we are worthy of a 5-star review. And let us know. Let us know what you like about the show or what you think about the show. And until next time, you guys, happy selling. Don't forget to eat those tacos
in large volume. Later, guys.